Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Leading Through Change and Disruption. Turn rapid change into your competitive edge, presented by Brad Wolf of PeopleMax. My name is Haley Bartley from IFAI, and I will be moderating the webinar today. This webinar will educate attendees on unique insights and tools to prepare organizations, leaders, and staff for today's constant and inevitable change. We encourage you to ask questions throughout and at the end of the webinar. Note that a survey will pop up automatically when the webinar concludes, and you'll have 2 chances to complete it, here or in the follow-up email. We value your feedback, and it's our only way of expanding and improving educational contents to you, so we hope you can fill it out. I am now happy to introduce our speaker for today's webinar, Brad Wolf, the People Maximizer. He is the managing partner of PeopleMax, and his focus is on leadership and its impact on culture, engagement, and results. His passion is making the science of human potential simple and practical to achieve greater success with less stress and more satisfaction. His clients achieve more success with less stress and greater satisfaction by maximizing people's potential and performance. He is a speaker and author of the best-selling book, People Problems: How to Create People Solutions for a Competitive Advantage. We will now begin the webinar.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Brad Wolf, just like the big Brad Wolf. You see my picture there, and frankly, I'm not dressed like that right now. I'm a bit more casual, but you can imagine me just looking like that right there. So my goal for the webinar is for you to leave with some specific takeaways that you can bring to your organization to provide a competitive edge for you and your people. I'm going to ask some questions during this presentation, and I invite everyone to take some time and think and write down your answers. This way you can get a better understanding of what you're currently doing well and where you want to improve. And there's going to be Q&A at the end, so I encourage everyone to ask your questions and use this as a way to learn, have some fun, and get questions answered. So Haley, if you would, please ask the first poll question.
Okay. I'll give everybody a couple seconds to answer. All right, it looks like we've got 55% of attendees in the Midwest. Just changed, 50% in the Midwest, 25 in the Southeast, and another 25 in the Far West.
Terrific. So Haley, if you would, please ask the second poll question.
Okay. All right, it looks like 50% of you are managers or supervisors, 20% CEO or president, 20% vice president or director, and then 10% staff level.
Wonderful. And I encourage everyone to ask Haley any questions you have during the webinar. And please feel free to share answers with her to any questions or anything that you think would be helpful. So I want to first start by telling you about a company that I knew extremely well. The company had done very well for the first 7 years of its existence. The president of this company, though, was not very flexible. He believed that because the way he had done things had been very successful in the past, these methods would continue to work after things changed.
He also didn't do any training and development for his people or himself. So the people in his company didn't learn the new knowledge and skills that were required to keep up with changes in the environment. He also wasn't particularly open to employees' concerns and ideas when they conflicted with his own beliefs. He thought he was smarter and more knowledgeable than his employees. Have you ever worked for someone like this? So what do you think happened to this company when the recession hit in 2009? It may not be a surprise to some of you, but the company went out of business within 12 months of the start of the Great Recession. Now, most of this company's top competitors survived. So this genius president knew he couldn't just blame it on the recession. Now, I actually knew this president very, very well. If you hold on just for a moment, I'm going to introduce you to him, if I can convince him to come out of hiding, that is. Okay, are you ready? The president of this failed company was me. The experience I just described was actually the driving force for me to absorb myself into research and learning how to adapt to a world of tremendous uncertainty and change. 6 months after this experience, I started a new company and ended up achieving greater success with less stress and more satisfaction than the previous business. Frankly, my competitive edge was a combination of applying the lessons from my previous failure and the research on how to adapt to change. So here we go. So it's all about how can you adapt better to change. I don't think anyone's going to argue that we live in a world of constant change. It just happens to be faster now than it was years ago. So what are the challenges or changes that you're most concerned about right now? Just take a moment and think about it. There's got to be one or two at least. And think for a moment about companies that were successful 10 to 20 years ago. They're out of business now. There's probably a few that come to your mind. In fact, which companies do come to your mind? What do you see as the reasons that they failed? You may have some ideas. There may have been companies that you actually worked at, so you were more intimately involved. And then with these companies you're thinking about, what do you think they could have done differently to have made it during that difficult time? Anyone here remember going into Blockbusters? How long has that been? See, Blockbuster dominated the home movie industry for years. And how could they have gone from dominant to dead in such a short period of time? They must have noticed Netflix coming and taking customers. Blockbuster certainly had the resources to create a new business model that could have competed with and maybe even dominated Netflix. But they didn't. They lacked a few key characteristics that are critical. And let's talk about the 3 characteristics that are critical to adapt to a changing world. Number 1, flexibility. What is it? Very simple. It's just a willingness to change or compromise. It's willingness. We can be flexible if we're willing. The second one is adaptability. That's the ability, not just willingness, but ability to adjust to new conditions. And the third, learnability. That's the ability to quickly learn new knowledge and skills. Now, how do these 3 characteristics impact your ability to adapt to change? Think about that for a second. So when you combine these 3 characteristics, you're able to create a flexible, adaptive learning organization. I call it a FALO for short. And like many things in life, there's an equation for this. Here's the equation. Flexibility plus learnability equals adaptability. That's like E equals MC squared for business. Maybe not quite at that level, but probably not far off. So what happens if you have high flexibility with low learnability? Because I'm going to talk about why both are important. People in organizations like that go along with changes. They're agreeable, but there really isn't any purpose or wisdom behind that flexibility. So that flexibility doesn't lead to adaptability. Now, what happens if you have high learnability with low flexibility? People in organizations like that have a lot of knowledge and skills that are relevant, but they're not open to different ways of doing things. So they become rigid, and that rigidity gets in the way of their ability to adapt. So that's why you need both. Now, let's look at Blockbuster again. How many Blockbuster stores do you think are in existence now in the entire world? That's not a poll question. It should have been, though, Haley. The answer is 1. There's actually a Blockbuster store in a city called Bend, Oregon. I actually called there to verify this, and they sent me a picture. I don't have that in the slides. But this store has adapted when other stores were not able to. So what did they do that's different? One thing is they provide Blockbuster branded merchandise made by a local resident. It has tremendous nostalgic value. Where else do you get it? Second thing is they've been able to attract a lot of notoriety, and people drive from miles away so they can experience that nostalgia. Where else are you going to walk into a Blockbuster? And they purchase a great deal of merchandise. They've also attracted the attention of filmmakers who are making a documentary about them, who's going to drive more notoriety and customers. They also provide a 7-day rental policy. Remember those fines you used to pay? Well, they've adapted to that. And they're in an area that doesn't have the quality high-speed internet for streaming. The key is they've built a following and a family because of their ability to adapt. And by the way, the manager's name is Ryan Harding. He's the one that sent me the picture. If you go there and mention my name, he'll give you 10% off merchandise. So let's talk about the 5-step process to develop a fallow. Number 1, and I'm going to go through 5 and then go into depth. People first, processes and technologies second. Number 2, create a personal development mindset. Number 3, create a culture of personal development. Number 4, leaders take inventory of their weaknesses. This is pretty much everyone's favorite from my experience. And then number 5, leaders commit to ongoing personal development. So y'all ready to get a little deeper into here? Well, ready or not, here we go. So shift your mindset from process and technologies first to people. All business problems are people problems. People are the ones that develop, select, implement, operate all of your processes and technologies. If you had different people or people operating differently, you would have different processes and technologies. So the root cause of all your processing technologies are your people. You're never going to fix those things by getting new ones. You've got to work through the people. Now, also, even perfect processes and technologies, whatever that is, require the right people doing the right things. You ever had great processes where people mess it up? It's not the process, it's the people. So, what's your organization's biggest people problem right now? You could even change that word to problems. How does this problem or problems, how do these problems impact your organization right now? Now we can go into step 2. Create a personal development mindset. You see, when people develop beyond their current capabilities or capacities, they contribute to the development of a fallow. What's interesting is that we all, as human beings, want to grow and develop beyond our current capacities. It's innate. But when you think about it, most people avoid the challenges that would allow them to grow and develop. Why do you think that is? Primarily the fear of looking bad and being punished for mistakes and weaknesses hinders our natural desire to grow. Now, fear, uncertainty, and doubt are personal development issues. that diminish our professional capabilities, our leadership, and our morale. They impair our capacity to grow. Thus, personal development and professional development are basically one and the same. So a personal development mindset is so important because you realize as people develop and increase their capacities, that's how your organization is able to do that. So let's talk about what is personal development. I basically put it into 5 categories. Number 1, the ability to develop clarity of purpose and desired outcomes. It's critical that you put your focus on what's most important. How often has distractions from that gotten in the way of your effectiveness? Second is to continuously develop innate gifts and talents and passions. We all have areas of innate gifts, talents, and passions. And there's a tremendous return on investment and enjoyment when we invest our time and effort in these. A lot of times I see organizations where they have people doing jobs that don't align with that. And that's not a real win. Next one, increasing awareness and acceptance of ourselves and others. Why is that so important? Well, as we increase our awareness, we start seeing our own impact on our outcomes. How often do we keep doing the same thing, not because our awareness isn't showing us that we're causing our outcomes? And the truth is, we're always having an impact on our outcomes. Now, acceptance of others and ourselves is important to deal with this sometimes unpleasant truth. We're all imperfect. As we learn to accept ourselves and others, we can deal with that better than we do by judging and criticizing the fact that we're all imperfect. Here's my favorite, managing our egos and emotions. Boy, has this one been a tough one for me. And it's a lifelong journey. I'm not going to tell you I've mastered this. I haven't ascended to some mountaintop in the Himalayas. When I look at the failure I just described, my ego and emotions were a huge hindrance. And until I was able to develop further in that area, I wasn't going to be able to run a company successfully when difficult times hit. And then intentionally working on weaknesses. Certainly putting much of your emphasis on your strengths is key, but if you forget about your weaknesses and don't address them, they can offset and derail your strengths. So you still need to be putting effort and focus on that where it's critical for your success. So how would a personal development mindset impact your organization? I'm going to let you think about that for a moment. Now we're going to go to step 3, and that is to develop a culture that supports personal development. The truth is, all sustainable culture change requires a culture that supports it. This is often forgotten when we try to create change, because we want to tell people you need to do this, you need to do that differently, etc., not realizing that culture is a habit. It's a habitual manner of behaving that's acceptable in your organization. Habits don't change overnight. So that's why you need to work on the culture and change the cultural habit. Interestingly, I once worked in an organization that had a culture that this was very hostile and competitive. And Bob, the manager that ran the department, really didn't know how to change the culture. People just argued when there were conflicts. And that led to a culture of constant conflict and arguing that he wasn't able to turn around. And I'm going to get back to that story in a minute. But Bob told people what they should do, but Bob didn't practice this and do things to change the culture. So he ended up getting fired, and we'll talk about that. Also, the key to changing a culture is the commitment of leaders to work on their own personal development. Leaders need to model the behaviors that they want to see in others. And as leaders, when we tell people to do things that we're not doing ourselves, it'll backfire, and we're going to lose trust, credibility, and respect. So the leaders setting the commitment and taking action is what drives a culture. So Peter Drucker, one of the most famous and respected management consultants of all time, said, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." Frankly, I think it eats it for lunch and dinner as well. The key is anything that you want to change strategically or anything else in your organization needs to be done through changing the culture. Let's go to step 3, and that is to develop a culture of personal development. So we are going to talk about how to do that. The key areas here have to do with the leaders setting the example. In the example of Bob that I told you about earlier, you see, Bob preached, get out there, listen to people, and find win-win solutions instead of arguing. But Bob didn't practice what he preached. Bob made assumptions, interrupted, jumped to conclusions when he should have been listening. So the culture didn't change because Bob didn't change. So the leaders are going to drive it. The company actually fired Bob and brought in Sue, who went to work on the culture. And this is really key. Not only did Sue teach people how to listen with the intent to understand rather than to respond, but she practiced this in her day-to-day interactions. So over time, people grew to respect, trust, and like Sue because she walked her talk. And gradually, the culture changed to a great extent because Sue consistently modeled this behavior rather than just telling people what they should do. So it starts with the leaders. So step 1 is to demonstrate the effort to improve. That's a key leadership action number 1. Personal development is about improvement. The second is to encourage effort over results in the early stages. Let's cover this one for a second. Many times we set up rewards and punishments based on results, and that ultimately is important to have results-based rewards and punishments. But in the early stages of change, people are developing a new habit. They're not going to get great results in the beginning. They're going to stumble. They're going to fall. It's awkward. It's clunky. Think about a young child learning how to walk. What percentage of the time are they walking versus falling? Every time I've seen, it's like 99% falling in the beginning and then gradually increases. What do we do as parents or family or people that are there? We encourage the effort, and the young child is feeding off that encouragement. What happens if we judge the child based on results? So it's very important to set up systems that are encouraging people and rewarding them for the efforts in the early stages of change. And then the third thing is to have negative consequences when people don't make the effort. It'd be nice if all you needed was to encourage people and reward them for the effort. But in reality, as human beings, there often needs to be some negative consequences for not doing it. Otherwise, people will tend to stay in their comfort zones. In the beginning, it could simply be reminders that are very nice reminders. But a system that only has rewards without any negative consequences will not tend to work well long term. So, what change in your organization's culture would most encourage personal development? I want you to think about that for a moment. Now, I'm going to talk about, we talked a little earlier about the reason we don't make more effort to get out of our, to grow and take on challenges is because from a time we're young, we're programmed, we're conditioned to look at mistakes and weaknesses as bad things that lead to punishment and ridicule. So what do? What we've learned to do is to stay in our comfort zones. In this way, we can feel confident, we can feel competent, and we can look good to others. And that prevents us from making the effort to take on bigger challenges. So it's so critical as leaders to create a culture that encourages people to get out of their comfort zones. One of the ways you can do it is let your people see you struggle as you learn new things, just as they struggle. Let your people see you admitting to weaknesses, just as they have weaknesses. So a culture of personal development is developed by the leaders being real and authentic and creating a safe environment to make the effort and fall, just like that young child. I don't know about you, but everyone I know, when we learn new things and try new things we're not competent in, are pretty darn, it's not very pretty. So we've got to create a safe environment. Now, let me use Google as an example. Why do I use Google? Well, number one, Google's a name everyone knows. And number two, you can Google this information to find it yourself. So we're going to look at Google's 3 principles for a top-notch culture. Every one of these principles supports a culture of personal development. Many of the leading companies get their strategic advantage by creating a culture of personal development. So principle number 1 is mission that matters. Bottom line is, when you have a clear purpose and people understand how their jobs impact that purpose, people are much more motivated to stretch and develop, do the things that are going to lead to that development and improvement. Also, that purpose is really huge. I don't have a whole lot more to add to it without being repetitive. So I'm going to go to the second principle, and that's transparency of leaders. At Google, it's key that leaders model openness and vulnerability. Another word for that is authenticity. You see, when leaders do this, it makes it safe for their people to do the same thing. And when people feel safe to be real, they start doing things like admitting to weaknesses, sharing unpopular viewpoints, and taking on uncomfortable tasks that are so critical for their development. But why would you take on uncomfortable tasks that are going to make you look bad and get punished? Because you're not going to do them well when you start. The third principle for a top-notch culture that Google uses is giving everyone a voice. When people have a voice, they feel like they're valued members of the organization and their engagement level improves. Also, when listened to, lower level people identify threats and opportunities that are critical for your survival and thriving. And creative, brilliant, innovative ideas can come from anywhere. Often it's the people you least expected it from. So Google's just an example of what I talked about earlier. And the takeaway is that when you create the culture, which takes time and commitment, you're able to embed that into how people do things that they're comfortable with and is natural to them. People are rarely going to act outside of the culture. They're either going to give up, leave, or get fired when they're conflicting too much with the culture. So let's talk about, and much higher engagement. I covered that already. So which of Google's principles would you like to do more of? Go ahead and take a moment and ponder that, and certainly write down that or any other questions that you have related to that. I'm going to go into step 4, and that is leaders take inventory of their weaknesses. I mentioned that earlier. See, we all have weaknesses, and a weakness is often misunderstood. We're so used to getting punished and ridiculed for our weaknesses growing up that we become afraid of them. But really, when we look deeper, a weakness is nothing more than a habitual way of thinking and behaving that impairs our effectiveness. In fact, that same characteristic may be a strength in a different job or environment. So when I started off out of college, I actually was an accountant. I majored in accounting, graduated with honors, and passed the CPA exam right out of college. Now, notice, these things tested my understanding of accounting theory and accounting principles. But then when I went to work as an accountant, that tested a whole different skills and abilities. You see, there's an expression in accounting that accountants that are low in detail get fired. Those accountants that are too high in creativity, they go to jail. I was both of those. Now, I didn't go to jail, but I got fired a few times. The key was the same characteristics that were a weakness, the big picture and the creativity were a weakness in my accounting career, were big strengths in other things. So it's important to realize a weakness is a strength in something else, and a strength is a weakness in something else. So that's part of understanding that what we think of as weaknesses is not really accurate until we understand that it's both. Also, and I cover this, every weakness has a benefit or strength side. You wouldn't have that characteristic if it didn't serve you well in some times or at some time. Often these are things that we developed as kids to adapt to our environment, but we keep holding on to them as a habit. Another thing that's important in terms of taking inventory of weaknesses is to develop the other side of the weakness. So a weakness is what is a weakness in your current situation? You still need to address it. You address it by developing the opposite side of it to the extent that it doesn't derail you. I'm going to use myself as an example. One of my many, many weaknesses, also a strength sometimes, is that I tend to be impatient. Now, the strength side of that is I don't let things brew and go on. I take care of things, I jump on things, and I don't let things just go on and on without action. The weakness of that is I can jump too quick, jump to conclusions, maybe lose patience too quickly. And so what I've learned to do is develop the ability to choose patience and live with patience when it serves me, and then to lower my patience when I need to take action. So by developing the other side of the weakness, I have greater range, and my impatience rarely, you can ask my wife, rarely gets the better of me. And then leaders' openness, encourage the same in others. We covered that earlier. What you model will be done by your people. So openness opens the door to learning, to taking on challenges, because we realize that we're all just people that are trying to grow. So good question for you to ponder. What's one weakness that you'd like to improve in? If you want to identify two, you can. You're not allowed to identify more than two. It's part of this process that it's a violation. One or two is the most. So let's go to step 5. Last step is to commit to an ongoing personal development process. You see, good ideas, good intentions are great, but it's committing to taking action that moves things forward. There's an expression that information without action is just entertainment. So taking these little steps and continuing to get in there, fall down, get back up, and committing to working on what's going to really move you forward is so important. And the second thing is start with small, easy steps. If you want to get better health and fitness, you may not want to just eat fruits and vegetables and go to the gym 6 times a week. You probably want to start with some little small things and then build momentum. So you don't want it to be so ridiculous that you're just hating it. You want it to be fun and rewarding. Also, going off course is normal. What we're working with are habits. Habits have a gravitational pull. That pull keeps on pulling on us. So every time we're pulled to get off course, we can catch ourselves, fall down, get back up, and get back on course. Also, consider outside support to fill the gaps. None of us has all the awareness of what we're doing, all the skills, all the expertise. So doing it alone is not the best way in most cases, and it certainly isn't the quickest way. So having a team, including some outside support, can be very helpful. And finally, practice what you preach. It's normal that we say something and do something else. The important thing is that we have a support team that lets us be aware of it so we can catch ourselves and make a new habit. Because when we say one thing and do another, it will derail the culture, it will derail our efforts. So what's one small step you can take now, okay, after we're done with this webinar, that you can take sometime today to improve in an area that you identified for improvement. I'll let you take a moment and write that down, and any questions that you have as well. So how do you know that your organization is moving forward and developing into a fallow, a flexible, adaptive learning organization? Well, one way is you find that people handle more of life and business challenges with less stress. The things that used to be a big deal that freaked you out before are not that big a deal anymore. You've developed, you've grown. Another thing is you find your business results improve and challenges start becoming opportunities. You see numbers improve because as people improve, their performance improves. And it's interesting, when challenges start looking like opportunities, that's a key pivot point or sign that what you're doing is really making progress. And here's a big one. People start climbing the personal development ladder. What is the personal development ladder? Well, we probably have people on each rung of the ladder. The first rung is those people that need to be told what to do and constantly monitored. There's another term for that, babysitting. Not only are they not developing and contributing what they can, but it's sucking away the time, effort, and energy of their supervisors. So those people are not really an asset. The next step that they can move to is takes responsibility. That's the mode that this is my job. I'm going to meet what is expected of me, and I'm going to go to people if I'm having a problem rather than let them find out afterwards. That's a big leap, but it's not the highest one. The highest one is takes ownership. They own that job. They're not interested in meeting the requirements. They're interested in setting a whole higher level of expectations because this is their job and they're going to do it better than you would have done it. As people climb the personal development ladder, they become more flexible. Their learnability increases. Your organization adapts to more and more change and gets a competitive edge where change starts becoming a competitive edge rather than something you just try to deal with. So I'm going to summarize here. So thriving in change requires flexibility, adaptability, and learnability. Flexibility plus learnability equals adaptability. Those are the two elements that you need to work with to create a fallow. And another one, Google's success, and they're very clear about it, is creating a culture that maximizes people's contribution and growth. That's it. They're very clear. It's that simple. And the 5-step process to create a fallow focuses on people and their personal development, but it has to start with the leaders. Leadership drives culture, culture drives engagement, engagement drives results. So if you remember nothing else, here it is. Your success and ability to adapt is going to come from developing a culture of personal development, which is going to drive personal development. People are not going to tend to work and do things outside of your organization's culture. So, if you would, and Haley, and please encourage them to type in the chat box what your biggest takeaway from today is. Although I don't know, you can group it in percentages. So, but I encourage people to just take a moment and type in their big takeaway. I would love to hear it. And I may get it afterwards.
Yes, thank you, Brad. I'll leave a couple seconds for people to ask a couple questions.
Let me just go to, and then what can you start doing now to start taking action on your takeaway? Again, information without action is just entertainment. Even small little action that doesn't seem to go anywhere is action that moves things forward. And then I want to encourage people, as you can probably tell, I'm not an ogre or anything like that. Reach out if you have any questions, email me, call me. I have an email list. You get on there and you get my weekly podcast. I have a leadership podcast where I interview a combination of successful business leaders and experts in the area of leadership development. So feel free to reach out to me, and you can ask questions.
I also want to note that Brad will be presenting at IFAI Expo That's taking place in Orlando, Florida on October 1st through 4th. We've got a couple questions that come in. The first says, I'm a new manager at a company and they wanted me to take this course to improve my skills. I loved it, but everything you teach, no one is doing in leadership. It is a very negative, hostile environment motivated by fear. How do I make any changes as a newcomer?
That is a great question, and a very common question, by the way. Fear-motivated cultures are the norm because that's the way people were conditioned from previous generations, in all fairness. So the best thing you can do is start by being very open and authentic and saying, I really want to succeed. And I see some things that I think that some changes that, if you're open to it, could start creating better results. Would you be open to talking? So you start with humility and authenticity of, I just have some ideas, wanted to run by you and get your thoughts. And share, here's what I see the impact, here's what I'm seeing. I want to highlight this point. It's important when you're talking to people about something that's a criticism, because it is a criticism. Your culture is a hostile culture and you're causing it. I mean, that's the truth. By the way, every organizational culture is a reflection of the leaders. Leaders are always causing, contributing to, or tolerating every behavior that they don't want. So an organization's culture cannot be something other than what the leaders are creating. It's impossible. So you don't want to approach people with criticism. So you want to say, I have some ideas, here's what I'm seeing, I want to get your thoughts. What you don't want to say is, this is a hostile culture, I think it's fear motivated, because if they were that open, they would have already probably started changing it. So you just want to say, here's some of the things I'm seeing, and here's what it seems like some of the outcomes are. What are your thoughts? So you can gauge the openness, because people that are not open to change will not change. But with authenticity and just saying, here's some things I'm seeing, what are your thoughts, opens a door, a crack, that people may be willing to start building some self-awareness. And some people probably are aware. The question is, they're often lost on where to even begin. So hopefully that's helpful. And thank you for sharing your question. That is a fantastic question.
Great. We have another question. It is, how do you shift a culture where you have key employees that would hurt you to lose? How do you approach those employees that seem not to be that engaged?
Great question. So let me make sure I understand it. You've got some really people that you don't want to lose, and they are a problem. They're contributing negatively to the culture. So that's my understanding of what your question is. So what do you do? I think what's real important is to realize the culture creates behavior and the behavior creates the culture. They work hand in hand. Each one reinforces the other. That's one thing. The second thing is, there really are no bad people, well, there may be one or two, okay? But in general, people are not bad. We're just conditioned. When I look at my business failure that I told you about in the beginning, I was a jerk. Sometimes the word used begin with an A instead of a J, okay? So, but I wasn't at heart a bad person. I just had some habits that I was conditioned to on what I should do that had to do with my own level of development. So it's important to realize people are working with their own level. They're not bad people. Second thing is, human beings innately want to improve. They want to develop. They don't want to be stuck. So those two things is where tremendous hope lies. So I think what's important is to realize we need to work on the culture. And the culture is a habit. Changing a habit, how quickly can you change a habit? You can't. Leaders need to exercise patience and persistence and reinforcement of what they want to keep on going back to creating the habit. And they need to create support systems where people encourage each other when they get off and exhibit the behavior that they're habituated to. So you've got to say this is a culture problem. This isn't an individual problem. And if when the culture improves, these people's behavior will improve. That was a long answer. The key is you've got to change the culture by thinking of this as a 8, 12, 16-month process, because research is very clear. Changing habits to where they become natural is that length. It isn't something, that's a month or two.
Great. We have another question. It is, how would you suggest implementing these teachings among a management staff? Would you suggest a group read your book or a course that everyone is required to take?
That's a great question, because the principles I'm talking about, it's hard to just implement yourself, because you're swimming uphill where there's awareness and skills and other things. At the risk of sounding promotional, a big part of what I do is do workshops, and then after I do workshops, there's ongoing group coaching to keep reinforcing and going past the obstacles, because there's no one-time event that's going to change people. It's a process, so there needs to be a consistent effort of support and accountability to drive a culture. So when experts come in and they do a training or whatever and they leave, how often is that successful? It's got to be something where the person doing the training or the team doing the training or whatever is involved in the reinforcement process to keep it going, because you will fall. And if there isn't the reinforcement and support, 9 out of 10 or more aren't going to work, because the habits you already have are going to derail it. So I know that was promotional, but you can read a book, but a book doesn't implement things. And by the way, I think my book is worth reading, but it will not implement itself.
All right.
Haley, that was a bit promotional, but that's the honest answer.
Yeah, totally. Next question is, what can we do to solve our labor shortage problem?
Fantastic question. Now, that is not in the scope of this, but it touches it. I actually had a 25-year career in the recruiting and retention industry. So you've got to think differently than your competitors do. Your competitors, the typical thought is, I'm looking for someone that has ABC skills. And there's a shortage of these people. What's more important is that they have the aptitude and the desire to do those jobs. I talked about innate skills and innate talents and passions. When you try to put people into jobs that they lack the innate passions and talents, you can train them all you want. You could have trained me 20 years to be a good accountant. I'm a crappy accountant, and it's not because I want to be. It's just so far out of my talent and passion that I'm not going to be good at it. So you start with changing your whole paradigm to defining what innate characteristics and passions you're looking for, and hiring people that those people are all over the place often. They're just not in those jobs now. But a lot of the jobs we're talking about, it's not brain surgery. It doesn't take a long period of time with someone that has the ability and desire to do it. So that's the starting place. The companies that are getting an edge get it, that you get the passion and the ability. You can train. You can have all the skill and all the experience in the world, but lacking the passion and the ability, that person's not going to be a good performer, and you're going to have all kinds of engagement and quality problems. So I know your question is a longer discussion, but I'm giving you the principles and why most companies miss the boat on that issue.
Great. Next question is, how can we help people move up the personal development ladder?
Great question. Actually, it really is working with them on their own personal development. And I talked about the 5 categories of personal development. The key is to identify which one is the biggest issue, because none of us does well working on a lot of things at once. So you take the one that's the biggest issue and you start with small wins, easy wins that they can do. But it starts, you have to develop a culture. I want to stress that efforts to help people on their personal development will fail if the culture doesn't support it. A little story I think bears mentioning. IBM in the early 1990s was struggling. The PC revolution was making them irrelevant. They were losing billions of dollars. And the board forced the CEO, John Akers, to resign because he wasn't able to lead the necessary adaptation. What they did, so the industry experts said IBM needs to hire a computer industry expert who only that person would understand the strategy that's necessary. They hired Louis Gerstner, who was CEO of RJR Nabisco, a consumer products company. How far away can you get? But Gerstner went to work on the culture first. He changed the IBM culture because he realized that that's the only way you're going to do things is to create the culture you want, then you work on the strategy. And his lesson to this Harvard MBA students were, you don't win with strategy and culture first. So you really got to think in terms of creating that culture. Efforts just to simply take someone aside can be helpful somewhat, but if the culture doesn't support it, it will not sustain. The culture will pull it out. And the culture starts with the leaders, by the way. The leaders need to start putting these things into action, and then people will start following because of the lead of the leaders.
Mm-hmm. All right, next question is, what is the best way to tell our people that we need to create a culture of personal development?
Great. By the way, these really are great questions. Well, it probably wouldn't be good to say, hey guys, we just need to develop more personally, because most people have certain connotations of what personal development is that would be like, oh, no, I'm going to sit there and meditate. By the way, meditating is good, but that doesn't mean they have to meditate. So I think what it is to go and to talk to them and say, look, we want to improve. How are we going to improve? What's going to cause us to improve? And open the dialogue for people to start talking about what's going to cause us to improve. And then when they say things, say, you know, the research indicates a company is nothing more than a group of people. Every technology, every process, everything in this company is a reflection of the people that chose it, implemented it, and operated. So the research is clear that as the people increase their capabilities, their capacities, they can handle more of the challenges that come up, and we get better. The most successful companies in the United States understand, whether they call it a culture of personal development or not. Google's very clear that it's about the people developing. Whatever you call it, people need to get better, which is personal development. If I increase my skills, that's an area of my personal development. But usually it's things first about handling ego and emotions, increasing their awareness, admitting to mistakes and being open that there's a lot to learn. Those are huge leaps in development, but you got to create that culture. So I would say to talk to them about that you want to get better, and that the research is really clear that getting better is from people increasing their capacity. I always use the term increasing their capacity and improving before you use the word personal development, because that term can have a lot of connotations that some people may not be as positive about initially. That was a long-winded answer, but hopefully that helped. But by all means, email me or call me if you want to talk further about it. I'm not going to charge you for that.
Great. And another question is, how do I know that people won't lose respect for me if I admit to my weakness?
That is such a common concern. It's a concern, frankly, almost all of us have. The problem is we've been conditioned to believe that admitting to mistakes, admitting to struggles, admitting to imperfections is a sign of weakness. But think about the people that do that openly and are just very real and authentic and use that to constantly improve. Do you have less respect for those people, or do you have more respect for those people? The vast majority of people consider that a character strength, because it takes more strength to say, man, I am struggling here. I'm not even sure where to begin. I'm lost. It takes a lot more strength of character to say that than it is to say, Oh, I'm cool. No, no, everything's great, man. Hey, I'm good. I'll let you know if I need any help. And we all innately realize that authenticity and realness is we're drawn to it. We trust those people. We're drawn to that. So I say, if you doubt it, experiment with it and let me know what your experience is.
All right. I think that is all for questions. Thank you so much, Brad, for your time and expertise. We really appreciate it. And again, be sure to fill out the survey at the end of the webinar so we can get your feedback. Thanks, everyone.
Hey, thank you very much, folks. You all have a great day.